Today, we're doing something highly focused and honestly incredibly fascinating. We're going to do a forensic slow read of just two profound sentences, literally exactly 31 words extracted from a deeply influential text, chapter 4, verse 3 of the Quran. Now, whether you're a scholar of the text or encountering this specific phrasing for the absolute first time, analyzing the sheer density of the logic packed into these 31 words, well, it's a masterclass in how ethical boundaries are constructed. We're really zoning in on the tension between human desire, permission, and our main focus today: why justice ultimately limits marriage choices. To truly grasp this dense material, we're going to dissect its logic across four distinct stages. 1, the initial choice. 2, the turning point. 3, the justice limitation. And 4, contentment with just one. So here's the entire puzzle we're solving today. Let me read it for you deliberately. Then, marry other women of your choice, 2, 3, or 4. But if you are afraid you will fail to maintain justice, then content yourselves with one. Look closely at the structure here. Notice the shift in tone and direction right midway through the text. It begins with an expansive, outward-looking permission, and then suddenly snaps into a strict, inward-looking condition. Let's break down exactly how this happens. Section 1. The initial choice. We begin our analysis with the very first clause, which completely sets the stage. The phrase, marry other women of your choice, is remarkably expansive. It immediately establishes a premise of permission and human agency. The text is addressing the reader by opening a door, acknowledging choice, and setting up a scenario where options are seemingly broadening. It frames marriage here fundamentally around the concept of a chosen path. But, the text doesn't just leave it as an abstract concept. It immediately starts quantifying this choice. The text explicitly outlines the multiplying options available, beginning with 2. Notice how this starts a real conceptual escalation. The singular baseline is immediately doubled. We're moving from a standard framework into a space of multiplicity. And the text continues building this narrative of expansion with 3. The momentum is pushing upward. The door of permission that was opened in the first clause, it seems to be opening even wider now, granting increasingly broader allowances. And finally, it peaks this escalation at 4. We reach the maximum limit of the permission granted in this opening sentence. When you read this first half of the text in isolation, you really feel the full weight of an expanding allowance. The progression of 2, 3, 4, it creates a clear upward trajectory of human choice. But just as we reach the absolute peak of this permission, the text does something brilliant. Which brings us to section 2, the turning point. Because what's really interesting here is that this marks a sudden, dramatic shift in direction. We just climbed this staircase of multiplying choices, and right at the top, the narrative completely pivots. It shifts from outward expansion to inward reflection. Wait, what? That single conjunction, but, acts like a sudden brake on a speeding car. It completely and instantly stops the numerical escalation we just experienced. The text introduces a highly subjective, deeply emotional metric: fear. It doesn't say if the law dictates or if society demands. It says, but if you are afraid. It forces an immediate shift from counting external choices to measuring internal capacity. Let's unpack the psychological weight of this. By using the phrase afraid, an internal condition is introduced that demands radical, honest self-reflection. It's asking the reader to look inward and really assess their own personal limitations. You have to know yourself well enough to anticipate your own potential for failure. This isn't just a legal loophole, it's a profound psychological audit. And what exactly are we supposed to be afraid of failing at? That takes us to section 3, the justice limitation. This is the absolute core filter of the text. It's the central axis on which the entire verse spins. Because those expansive choices we saw earlier, they're entirely contingent on navigating this specific limitation. Fail to maintain justice. This specific fear acts as a hard boundary on the choices previously offered. The text doesn't limit the choice based on wealth or status or time. No, the ultimate limit on human desire and permission here is a strictly ethical one: justice. If justice is in jeopardy, the permission retracts. It implies that multiplying relationships inherently multiplies the complexity of maintaining perfect fairness. It challenges us to confront our own human fallibility in managing that complexity. And this brilliantly illustrates the text as a rigorous ethical equation. It perfectly balances initial permission against ultimate responsibility. On one side, you have the expanse of choices, 2, 3, or 4, but they're permanently locked behind the prerequisite of maintaining perfect justice.
On the other side, if there is even a fear of failing to maintain that justice, the equation forces an immediate limit to 1. Justice is the great equalizer here. It acts as the ultimate governor on the engine of human choice. We can actually map this out as a strict, logical flowchart. Step 1. Consider the plural choices, recognizing the permission granted. Step 2 is the critical hurdle. Assess your internal, personal ability to maintain absolute justice among those choices. And step 3, make the final choice not based on what you desire, but based entirely on your fear of ethical failure. It's a fascinating psychological journey, literally compressed into just a few words. Now for section 4, contentment with just 1. Let's see how this builds into the final resolution. We've seen the permission, we've hit the ethical filter, and now we arrive at the definitive answer the text provides when that filter of justice is applied.
The closing instruction is incredibly revealing. Then content yourselves with 1. Notice it's not framed as a punishment or a deprivation. The use of the word content implies finding peace and stability by recognizing and respecting one's own limits regarding justice. By acknowledging that you might fail ethically and actively choosing to limit yourself to 1, you secure justice, and consequently, you secure contentment. The argument here is that true satisfaction isn't found in maximizing choices, it's found in maximizing fairness. Think about this solitary, stark number. Contrast this with the rapid-fire 2, 3, 4 from earlier. After all the escalation and the complex ethical equations, the text lands on this solid, grounded absolute. Let the weight of that ultimate limitation really sink in. When the high standard of justice cannot be absolutely guaranteed across many, the moral imperative drastically reduces the scope to just 1. So the crucial takeaway here is exactly how and why justice actively limits desires in this framework. This forensic read shows us a crystal clear arc. Choice is indeed initially granted, establishing human agency. But justice is immediately introduced as the ultimate standard, towering over that choice. The mere fear, the internal, honest realization of potentially failing that standard of justice, is what actually limits the choice. And finally, the text posits that true ethical contentment is found in embracing that limitation with just 1. Which leaves us with this final, profound thought to ponder. We've just analyzed how a 31-word text uses the strict standard of justice to actively limit and bound one of the most intimate, personal human choices possible. But step back and look at the broader logic here. If the fear of failing to maintain fairness is powerful enough to overrule human desire and cap our most personal allowances, where else in our lives, our societies, or our institutions should the standard of justice be acting as the ultimate limit on what we simply desire to do?